Hello, it's James Harcourt again with another tutorial video. This time it's about a track I've done called Beholden with Sincopat, for Sincopat, released on Sincopat, and it's even simpler than the last one I showed, but it didn't start that way, and the journey there, I want to show the first cut of it that was done like a few months back and then parked, and then I revisited it and essentially stripped everything away and was left with the root notes of the melody, and then wrote that new bass line lead thing around it and built the track fairly quickly. But this track ended up no, this is Sincopat, isn't it? Pedal up, pedal. Right, yeah. So I'm going to show you the finished track, the final thing, which is just looks so simple, and I don't want to give that false impression that I just fire this stuff up and knocks together like 6 tracks and boom, it's done. To get it to become easy, you have to go through like a more laborious period, which can be quick but quite often be very slow. And I think a lot of producers, if they're honest, will admit to the fact that it can be a long way to, a long road to discover that hook or that right sound or that thing that's just worth building on. So I'd written the kind of the melodic progression of the root notes, but then it was all really in the sound design to take it to the next level, and the arrangement, the things that happen one after another, because you'll see in that original version it's a million miles from the finished result. So yeah, let me show you that now. So I'm just opening up the old version of the track, one of the old versions, so at the point when I did a mix down, and this wasn't the very first cut either. But this is after I'd written the melody, and I was trying to build one of the several attempts I had to try and build a track I was satisfied with around that melody. And it had a lot of parts, but none of them really cut the mustard. So you can hear the notes, but really it doesn't bear that much resemblance. And I had a separate lead and bass that were playing together, but yeah, it just wasn't right. Essentially what I did was park it in May and then came back to it a couple of months later, and yeah, I'm going to show you that project now. Okay, so here's the finished project where everything is audio apart from one battery channel and two sampler tracks, one playing a tom drum, one playing white noise as a hi-hat, basically a hi-hat but made from SH09 white noise. So I've got 3 effects tracks, 2 groups, but one of those groups isn't really a group, it's just got one thing going to it, which is a kick drum, so that could just be one track. So just for efficiency, I can do this here and now. So it's stripped down to 3 effects channels, 1 group track, clap track. So this is actually 1 track. One's the MIDI track and one is the audio. There's a pad, there's a sequence, kind of, I called it ARP, but it's really a sequence. There's a pad that plays in a couple of places. That was created with the Nord, and then there's the main bass line stroke lead, which is created with the favourite, the Moog Voyager. Nice monophonic synth. So as always, what's happening with that one is it's going to the main output, which is kind of thinking of that as the bass. I'm using a full-on sidechain here, although I've recently taken to using, instead of using a sidechain, I'll use one of these EQs, and I'll create, like I'll pick the fundamental frequency, I'll pick a fairly fat Q, and I'll make it dynamic. Put in a sidechain input, and then I'll sidechain to that input, and then I'll duck just at that fundamental frequency. I've tried doing that, and that way you don't have to have the ducking of high parts, particularly something that's got high frequencies a lot of the time. In this track, a lot of the dynamic range is achieved by the opening and closing of the cutoff filter on the Moog Voyager. So yeah, I've actually got in this project the 2 MIDI tracks. So you can see here, one is the main lead, one is that sequence. So they're the 2 key parts. I'll re-enable the automation. So let's focus on the main lead and bass line. and I've got a copy of it in here as MIDI, and so we're actually playing the bounced audio version of it, but I can show you the automation lane. So I'll show all of the automation. So a lot of the qualities of the track originate from sound design of that kind of bass line. So that's a Moog Voyager patch, which I've spent quite a bit of time dialing in. I'm using oscillator sync. I'm using all 3 oscillators. I have to sort of, yeah, it just took a lot of time to get something that sounded nice and rich in the bass frequencies, but rolled nicely into arpeggiated kind of higher notes. And you can see from the previous track you saw the root notes for the melody, so the main progression of the track was already there in an arrangement roadmap, which was based on the previous version of this track pretty much, but I might have extended this section, which I'm wiggling the mouse on now. So there's 3 sections where I do this chord change section, and this one, but both of the last 2 are quite climactic, but particularly this one. So if I add in now some of the other tracks, so the main ones are the hi-hat and essentially the clap. So if I show the automation, it comes in about just over 1/3 of the way through and has some automation on the reverb mix and some of the delay input gain, and there's a send being sent to a special channel, FX channel, called delay snare, so I'll show that one as well. Delay snare. And delay snare has got a crystallizer on it with the regeneration automated and the feedback automated at that main climax point. So let's just focus on the snare for a minute, although I say delay snare, it's actually delay clap out completely. So I've kind of got some unnecessary building there. At one point maybe I had that. Let's just see what that sounds like if I leave that up. Yeah, so right at the climax point that wouldn't sound very good. I'll show you. So it's just cluttering it with unnecessary claps at the point when it needs to go quiet. Because right before the drop, so now I'm going to focus on the ARP part. I call it ARP. It's a sequence which is very simple. Played on another one of my favourite synths for doing this. I'm starting to like Diva for doing these things, but this is the Nord that I'm using for this. So I've automated a bunch of parameters on the Nord. I do this in real time and then go in and sort of clean it up. Essentially the most important ones are this one, which is the filter cutoff pretty much, or the filter frequency, and then you've got the 2 releases for the amp envelope and for the filter, and then some other parameters like decay and LFO. And so if I bring up span, the good thing about the Nord, it's kind of like the Roland synths. It's resonant in a particular frequency. So have a look here. So it pretty much plays this simple sequence until we start opening the filter up here. So this is just complementing the track and adding kind of like rhythmical repetition, which is good for just locking people in. So at that point, there's some white noise. You're hearing it now because the filter frequencies come up to a level where it comes through. Now what's important there is seeing how that rise and fall of the filter frequency, how that relates to what I've got going on with the hi-hat, which is white noise. So you can see the hi-hat on the white noise, the release and the decay, I've tweaked those at the same time. So have a listen how they play together. So there's just that intensity build at that moment with those two parts. Now let's have a look at how that interplays with the lead. So yeah, this is the part where so that's the first sort of mini break, as you call it. Although it's not really a break because the kick drum, I believe, is playing in that section. Look. But it's the first chorus. It's the first bit where I change the pattern. At that point, it changes. So you can see the three parts with the Nord sequence, the Moog bass lead, and the hi-hat. All working together for the tension element by opening the respective releases or filters or whatever it is that's going to make that sound, you know, come together and sound really powerful. So I'm going to bring the clap in. That's what I mean about, you know, it's all in the arrangement, because once you've got a nice set of sounds that work well together and you've got some controllable parameters that work together in a way that you know, sounds cool when you start opening up filters and releases and so on, it's really then about the arrangement. And of course, already the writing's been done, like the melody was written by this point, so it was just about getting the arrangement right. And earlier when I said the arrangement suggested itself, as you play it through, what I mean by suggested itself, you get to a point where you think, you just feel what's going to come next, and that's not necessarily something predictable, and that's the bit that I can't explain, because it's just decisions that are made in the moment. And it's best to try and do it all in the moment, and get a flow on, so you're working your way through the track in sections, but not pausing too long on one, and not keep going back and playing the whole thing. So you kind of zero in on this break, and then you've got the post break bit. So this is quite a long section. If we look at the arrangement track that I put in, this section here, which I called it P2, phase 2, verse 2, whatever. So this is the main body of the track, actually, either side of the mini break, the first one, and building up to this big break. So it's important that in this one, good stuff happens, really, that tells the story in the way you want, you know, so it needs to not give away too much too early. So you can hear there's a gradually building set of noises, right, but I'm not adding any new parts. All I'm doing is bringing in, let's have a look at the different things that are happening, right? So there's crystallizer building on the delay. Crystallizer building on the delay clap part, which is essentially the clap, which is echoing and all the rest of it. The arp, the Nord thing I was just talking about, that's sending more and more to what I call crazy delay. So that's a delay I've got that's got, I'll show you that one real quick. Yeah, so we've got something called crazy delay, and I've used this on another couple of tracks. It's one that I built myself and put a load of automation. I kind of pretty much did random movements on different dials on something called the Waves H delay, which is, it's my second favorite delay plugin, because it's just got, yeah, you can just make it do some wild stuff with this depth and rate. So there's a modulation. The depth obviously defaults to 0, but as you bring it up, it starts modulating the kind of the pitch of the delay feedback. And when you go 100% wet and you start changing these things in the right way, and particularly the low pass, and you bring the delay amount by the milliseconds, not by the BPM, really down low, you get some really cool effects. It's this thing of you've got a small sound, it doesn't really matter what that sound is, probably just like a very short, a sharp attack and minimal amount of decay and release, and you just feed it through one of these things and you bring the low pass down and you have a you play with the feedback till you've got something that lasts just the right amount of time, and you can tune it with this delay. I don't want to touch that because I'm going to screw it up, but yeah, if I imagine if I'm turning this down almost like between 1 and 20, you don't get the precision on there to really tune it, but I'm looking for a plugin where I can really control that stuff. So this is a really cool plugin that you can do some creative things with, but in this case it's kind of crude really. I'm just wildly changing parameters and then feeding stuff into it, so it just gives you an unpredictable and interesting sounding effect. You can hear, let's just try and solo that. So by bringing this effect slowly in, it's just adding, I don't know how you can describe it, just it's intensity really, but in a mildly chaotic kind of way, but quiet in the mix, you know, so it's not just dominant in the mix. So on the ARP itself, yeah, as we're approaching this climax point, which is here, yeah, from 193 to 209, those bars, this is like the approach to it, and then I've got the chord change and that all important second quote unquote chorus. As it's approaching that, look at the parameters that I've automated on the Nord. The filter cutoff is opening. It opens quite a bit in that first section, and towards the latter part of it, it holds steady, and then it opens up really big. And let's listen to what it does in this section. So this one, as well as the clap, is also going to that crazy delay effect. So the crazy delays had some effects as we approach the breakdown as well. Here I kind of increased the feedback a lot at one point. See, the release is going up, so the sound is lengthening. The white noise is building because those white noises are hitting along with the sound. And then I change the note toward the end. And by this point it's just noise. And then it stops dead. They're not like pre-planned ideas. Okay, this is what I'm going to want here. You just sort of do them at the time and go with the feeling of what's good, what feels good, what sounds good. And if you've prepared good sounds at the start, this process becomes just really natural. If you've got a flaky sound or something you're not sure about from the start, you can bet that when you're doing this stuff, you've got that niggling doubt, and that's when you get stuck. You know, if you've gone 2 hours into a session and you've got a dud part that you're spending time automating, but it still doesn't sound right, you've got to stop and just accept that session isn't, you know, what you've learned is don't waste time on a part that's no good, and then see yourself as having learned that. So this is the main break again, so let's listen to what some of the other parts are doing, the main part. So at this point it will start to build. We haven't got the MIDI, but I'll look at the waveform. You can imagine what's happening on the MIDI. I only automated the cut-off filter, and that's just opening at the right rate here. So at this point it's pretty much full. And I'm slowly starting to bring in the filter freak. So those only 3 parts. The combination of the crystallizer on this bass lead is adding some triumphant sounding things that are an octave up. It's already a nice source sound, so you know that what's going to come out of the effect is going to be nice. The ARP is also going through some crazy effects and compounding. There's a note change. There's almost a chord coming from that. There's something nicely harmonic. The percussion and the white noise is building, which just creates a lot of excitement. And the kick drum's been dropped out at this point, and that's all you need. That's going to give you a lot of impact at that point. This whole thing. Oh yeah, the tom drum. So yeah, because this is a section where I'm removing the kick drum, I need this to go away because it's a bass. It's a part that's carrying bass frequencies. You have a look here. It's resonant around about 128, and it's constant. It's hitting every 16 notes. It's not loud in the mix because it could just kill the mix if it's too loud, and that just adds to the groove. I'm a big fan of using toms in music. All my best tracks seem to use them. It's worth taking time to make them nice. Get the tail length right, get the pattern right. I put them into a sampler generally, and it comes back in with a simple piece of white noise. I think I've modulated it a little bit there with an auto panner, which starts off at a fast pad and then slowly decays. Nothing too dramatic. And then a little one. So there you have it. It's a fairly straightforward track, but the journey there was not necessarily straightforward. And again, the message I would give to producers is you make sure every sound is a sound that you love and you're really, really happy with. And the more prominent they are, any sound that you're kind of compromising with, don't move on until you've dealt with it, particularly at the start. If during the track you've got something that's a placeholder, clap or kick, I think those things can be substituted. You can rebuild the drum track at any time. You've got to get the rest of it right, I think. The kick is important and the bass line is important, but if you've got those other elements right, because you can write something new around a theme which you've already invested the effort in. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.